Cynthia's eyes never softened, not even in the room where my husband's life was being divided into neat piles of paper. She sat across from me at the long oak table, her manicured nails drumming an impatient rhythm. Beside her, my son Daniel stared down at his folded hands, silent, as though he had forgotten how to speak. "You've had your time, Martha," Cynthia said evenly, her smile as sharp as broken glass. "The farm should pass to Daniel now. It's what Frank would have wanted. You can't handle it alone." Her words slid across the table like a knife. I felt the air catch in my chest. My husband's chair at the head of the table sat empty, and in that absence, she was already trying to erase me. The lawyer cleared his throat, but before he could speak, I lifted my chin. "I'm glad you're here. If you're cozy with the story so far, please like, subscribe to Tears Within, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. We'll weave the next part together." I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but my voice refused to rise. The farm wasn't just land. It was the dirt Frank and I had carried beneath our nails, the sweat we had poured into the soil, the winters we had survived side by side. To hear her dismiss me like a relic, it cut deeper than the grief already lodged in my ribs. The lawyer shuffled his papers. "The will specifies a division of assets. Mrs. Ellis retains primary residence at the farm. Further matters will be addressed in due time." Cynthia leaned forward, her eyes never leaving mine. "Due time. With all respect, Daniel has worked here his whole life. He deserves control now." Daniel flinched. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I searched his face for loyalty, for a shred of his father's strength, but found only hesitation. The meeting dragged on with numbers, deeds, and clauses that felt more like a foreign language than the story of my marriage. When it ended, Cynthia placed a hand on Daniel's arm and rose first, her heels striking the hardwood floor with finality. On her way out, she paused near me. "You should rest, Martha. Think about what's best for the family." The door closed behind them, and the silence swallowed me whole. That evening, I wandered through the farmhouse in a fog. The walls seemed to lean closer without Frank's steady presence. His boots still stood by the back door, dust clinging to the soles. His hat hung on the peg, waiting for a head that would never return. The kitchen smelled faintly of the coffee he had brewed every morning, strong enough to chase me from sleep. I pressed my hand to the worn countertop, remembering how his palm would rest there while he told me the day's plans. For 60 years we had built a rhythm, and now, in a single week, the beat had stopped. I sat at the kitchen table and stared at the unpaid bills stacked in a neat pile. Property taxes, equipment repair, the never-ending costs of a farm that demanded more than it ever returned. Frank had always said, "The land gives back, Martha, just not on your schedule." Without him, I wasn't sure I could hold it together. The phone rang, sharp in the quiet. I answered to hear Cynthia's voice, smooth as butter left too long in the sun. "Martha, I just wanted to check in," she said. "I know today was difficult, but we really should talk about transitioning the farm before the next planting season. It's for the best." I gripped the receiver tighter. "The best for who?" "For Daniel," she replied without hesitation. "For Leo, too. He deserves to know his family's legacy is secure." My grandson's name, used like a pawn. I bit down the anger rising in my throat. "Frank left me the farm," I said quietly. There was a pause, the sound of her sigh traveling down the line. "Martha, you can't work it alone. You'll burn yourself out. Just think it over." She hung up before I could answer. I set the phone back in its cradle and sat there in the fading light, the kitchen growing darker with each passing minute. I thought of Frank, of his steady hands guiding mine through each storm we had weathered. He had believed in me, even when I hadn't believed in myself. And now, I felt him still, just out of reach, whispering not to surrender. The next morning, I pulled on my boots and walked the fields. Frost clung to the soil, glinting in the pale sun. The rows of earth stretched out like pages of a book we had written together. Every furrow held memories, Seasons of struggle, moments of triumph, the laughter of our children running between the corn stalks. I stopped near the barn and rested against the weathered boards. Inside, tools hung neatly where Frank had left them, each one familiar as a friend. A lump rose in my throat. The farm wasn't just work, it was our story, and I wasn't ready to let anyone take it away. But as I turned back toward the house, a weight pressed down on me. Cynthia was right about one thing. I couldn't do it all alone. The thought haunted me as I climbed the porch steps. In the afternoon, I sat at Frank's old desk, rifling through the drawers. I needed to see with my own eyes what he had left behind. Bills, receipts, notebooks scrawled with planting schedules. Then, tucked under a stack of faded almanacs, I found an envelope. My name written in his steady hand. My breath caught. I broke the seal with trembling fingers. Inside was a single page. Martha, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Don't be afraid. The farm is yours. All of it. I've made sure of that. But there are things you don't know. Things I couldn't bring myself to say while I was here. Look in the bank box. The key is hidden where we kept the Christmas money. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes. Frank had left me something he hadn't shared while alive. My heart pounded as I rose, moving to the cabinet where we had always stashed spare cash in December. Behind the false back of the drawer lay a small brass key, cool against my palm, a secret, waiting for me to uncover. I held that little brass key in my hand for a long time, turning it over as if it might whisper its secret. The metal was worn smooth from years of use, but I couldn't remember the last time Frank and I had gone to the bank together. If he had hidden something away, he must have meant for me to find it only after he was gone. The thought both comforted and frightened me. The next morning, I drove into town, the key heavy in my coat pocket. The bank was quiet, the way small-town banks always are midweek, the scent of lemon polish and old paper greeting me as I stepped inside. The clerk, a young man with freckles, led me into a back room where the safe deposit boxes were stored. My fingers trembled as I fit the key into the lock. The door opened with a reluctant click, and inside sat a plain brown envelope with my name on it. I carried it to the small table, my pulse hammering in my ears. Tearing the flap open, I drew out a stack of papers and a single letter. The handwriting on the letter was Frank's, steadier than it had been in his final months. "Martha," it began, "if you are holding this, you're standing where I once stood, knowing that some truths can't be spoken face to face. I never wanted to burden you, but I couldn't leave you without tools to protect what we built." The papers beneath the letter were deeds, legal filings, and copies of financial transfers. My breath caught as I realized what I was holding. Frank had shifted the ownership of the farm into a trust solely under my name, not Daniel's. And more than that, there were records of a savings account I hadn't known existed, a modest fortune tucked away over decades. He had protected me, shielded me from the storm he must have known was coming. I sat there in the sterile little room, my hands pressed to the cool table, and whispered his name. He had known. He had seen Cynthia circling even before I had, and he had acted quietly, leaving me with a lifeline. But as I read further, my stomach twisted. At the bottom of the pile lay another envelope, smaller, marked with 2 words that sent a shiver down my spine. For Martha's eyes only. I didn't open it right away. I slipped everything back into the larger envelope, tucked it under my arm, and drove home. The farmhouse seemed to watch me as I pulled up, its windows reflecting the weak afternoon sun. Inside, I sat at the kitchen table staring at the smaller envelope as if it might bite. Finally, with trembling fingers, I tore it open. The letter inside was shorter, written in a hand that shook. "Martha, there is something you should know about Daniel." I couldn't read the next line at first. My eyes blurred and my throat closed. When I forced myself to continue, the words felt like stones tumbling onto my chest. "He may not be mine by blood." I dropped the page, the words echoing in the stillness of the kitchen. My mind scrambled, reaching back through decades, searching for cracks I might have missed. Daniel's smile that had always reminded me of my sister's, not Frank's. The way Frank had sometimes looked at him with a sorrow I couldn't name. The words sank deeper with every breath. Daniel may not be mine by blood. The room swayed, and I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles ached. Frank hadn't written more than that, just a few lines saying he had never spoken of it because he loved me too much to cloud our life with suspicion. He asked me not to judge Daniel harshly, to remember that love raises a child, not blood. I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes. Love raises a child. But what would Cynthia do if she ever discovered this? She had already sharpened her knives over the farm. If she knew that Daniel's claim might not even be valid, she would use it like a blade. That night, I lay awake in the bed that felt too large, Frank's letter folded on the nightstand. The secret throbbed in my mind like a wound. I wanted to protect Daniel, even from his own wife. But how could I if the truth tore through the walls of this family? 2 days later, Cynthia came again, this time without calling. She swept into the kitchen as though she already owned it, Daniel trailing behind her like a shadow. "Martha," she said, her tone honeyed but her eyes sharp. "We've been thinking. With spring coming, it's time to make a decision. Daniel can take over the planting, manage the accounts. You can relax. Wouldn't that be easier?" I looked at my son. His eyes flickered to mine, searching, but he said nothing. "Easier for who?" I asked. "For everyone," Cynthia said smoothly. "For you, for Daniel, for Leo." She set a folder on the table. "I've already spoken to an attorney about transferring control. All it takes is your signature." My hands itched to reach for Frank's trust documents, to slam them onto the table and watch her face crumble. But the letter about Daniel lay heavy in my memory. If she sensed weakness, she would dig. And if she dug too far, she might find what Frank had hidden for me alone. I closed the folder gently and slid it back across the table. "Not today." Her smile tightened. "You'll have to decide soon. This farm can't run itself." They left after a few minutes of strained silence, the screen door banging behind them. I sank into Frank's old chair, the papers from the bank box hidden safely upstairs, and felt both stronger and more fragile than I ever had before. I had a secret that could shatter everything, and sooner or later I would have to decide how to use it. The days after Cynthia's visit dragged like heavy boots across my chest. Every morning I rose before dawn, pulled on my boots, and walked the farm just as Frank used to. The air was still sharp with winter, the fields brittle with frost, but I needed to see them, to remind myself why I could not simply sign the papers she had shoved at me. Each fence post, each furrow of soil felt like Frank's voice whispering, "Hold on." But holding on was not easy when every hour seemed to remind me how alone I was. The tractor coughed and sputtered when I tried to start it. A section of the roof over the barn leaked badly enough that I had to place buckets beneath it. The bills piled higher, and with them came a gnawing worry that I might not manage another season without help. And yet the thought of handing the reins to Cynthia, with her sharp smile and her endless calculations, felt worse than defeat. One afternoon I drove back into town to run errands. The grocery store aisles felt narrower than I remembered. The faces of neighbors sharper in their glances. It didn't take much to notice who had been talking. Cynthia had been spreading her story. How I was too old to manage. How I clung to the farm out of pride. I could hear it in the careful way people said hello, in the way two women fell silent when I turned into the bread aisle. Small towns carry rumors like wind carries smoke, and soon everyone smells the fire. At the register, Mrs. Whitman leaned close. She'd known me since Daniel was a boy. "Martha," she said softly, "folks are saying things. Don't let it eat at you. Your Frank was a good man. He wouldn't have wanted this fuss." Her words were kind, but I felt the sting all the same. I drove home with bags of flour and coffee rattling in the back seat and the silence of the road pressed against my thoughts. That evening, I sat at Frank's desk again and spread out the papers from the bank box, the trust deed, the savings account records, and that letter about Daniel. Every word cut deeper the longer I stared at it. My instinct was to protect him, to keep the secret buried. But how could I, when Cynthia's greed was already pulling at the edges of our family like a seam about to rip? The phone rang, jolting me. It was Daniel. "Mom, can I come by?" His voice was hesitant, softer than I remembered. When he arrived, Cynthia was not with him. He stood in the doorway, shifting his weight like a boy again. "I know she's pushing," he said finally, "but she's only trying to help. She thinks if we take control now, we can keep the farm afloat." "Is that what you think?" I asked. He rubbed his hands together. "I don't know. I want things to be easier for you." I studied him, my son who looked so much like me in the eyes but who carried shadows I couldn't always read. "Easier isn't always better, Daniel. Your father made choices. He left the farm to me. You have to respect that." He dropped his gaze. "She says you can't manage it alone." My chest tightened. I wanted to shout that Frank had trusted me, that I had documents proving it, but the secret in the letter burned too close to the surface. Instead, I touched his arm gently. "You grew up here. You know what this land means. Don't let her talk you out of remembering that." He nodded, but the doubt in his eyes lingered. When he left, I sat in the quiet kitchen long after his truck pulled away, the weight of both his silence and his loyalty pressing down on me. 2 nights later, I found an envelope slipped under the back door. My name was scrawled in hurried ink. Inside was a single page, unsigned. "She's talking to a lawyer in the city. Be careful." I didn't know who had left it, but my stomach dropped. If Cynthia was reaching beyond the county, she was preparing for a bigger fight. I folded the note into my apron pocket and pressed my hands against the counter until my pulse steadied. The next morning, I called Pastor Henry, who had presided over Frank's funeral. He'd been a friend to both of us for decades. When he arrived, he brought with him the smell of coffee and the weight of calm. I showed him the trust papers, but not the letter about Daniel. "You're not wrong to guard this," he said after reading them. "Frank was deliberate. He wanted you protected. But you need to prepare. If Cynthia takes this to court, it won't just be about papers, it'll be about who the town believes, and she's working on that already." His words rang true. I thought of the grocery store whispers, the sideways glances. The fight was bigger than deeds. It was about reputation. And in a small town, reputation is half the battle. That night, I walked the farmhouse halls, touching the frames that lined the walls. Wedding photos, harvest festivals, Daniel at 6 years old clutching a pumpkin almost bigger than he was. Each picture felt like a plea. Don't let it be erased. Upstairs in the bedroom, I unfolded Frank's private letter once more. "Daniel may not be mine by blood." The words made me ache in a way no farm bill ever could. I wanted to protect him from Cynthia, from the truth, from everything. But a quiet voice inside me wondered, what if Frank had been right to leave me the farm because he knew? What if he had hidden this secret not only for my sake, but because it made Daniel's claim weaker than anyone realized? I pressed the letter back into its envelope and tucked it beneath my pillow, as if keeping it close might help me decide. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, the farmhouse creaking like an old man shifting in his sleep. Tomorrow, I thought, I will decide. But tomorrow came, and I was no closer to knowing how to fight. The following week, the storm I had been dreading finally broke. A thick packet arrived by courier, heavy with legal weight. Inside were documents drafted by Cynthia's city lawyer, demanding immediate transfer of farm ownership to Daniel. They argued that my age and declining capacity left me unfit to manage, that the land's debts required fresh leadership. The words bled arrogance, but beneath them I felt Cynthia's hand guiding every line. She was no longer just whispering at the diner. She was drawing battle lines in black ink. I sat at the kitchen table with the papers spread before me, the late afternoon light slanting through the curtains. My hands trembled, not just from anger, but from the dread of what lay ahead. They would drag me into court, force me to stand before neighbors who already questioned whether I was clinging out of pride. And if I faltered, everything Frank and I had built would be swallowed whole. That evening, Daniel stopped by, his face drawn. "She went too far," he admitted, dropping into a chair. "I didn't know she'd file this." I studied him carefully. "And do you agree with it?" He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck. I don't want to see the farm collapse, Mom. Maybe she thinks she's protecting me, protecting Leo. I don't know anymore." The ache in my chest deepened. Frank left this farm in my care for a reason. It wasn't by mistake. You think he didn't worry about collapse? He trusted me, Daniel. Why can't you? His eyes flickered with something, guilt maybe, but he didn't answer. Instead, he muttered, "She won't stop, Mom. You know that," before slipping out the door. His truck's headlights swept across the fields as he drove away, leaving me in the silence of his absence. Sleep refused to come that night. I lay awake listening to the creak of the farmhouse, the groan of old beams in the wind. Frank's voice echoing in my memory, "Hold steady. You'll know what to do." But how could I hold steady when every step forward seemed to crack the ground beneath me? 2 days later, I took the bank documents and trust papers to a local attorney I trusted more than anyone in the city. His name was Bill Harper, a man with a kind face and a reputation for fairness. He read every page slowly, his brows knitting deeper as he went. "Martha," he said at last, "these are airtight." Frank knew what he was doing. "The trust is legally binding. The savings account is yours. If Cynthia pushes this, she'll lose. But she'll make it ugly first. You need to prepare for that." Ugly. The word settled over me like a shadow. That weekend, Cynthia arrived unannounced again, this time with Daniel and little Leo in tow. She sent the boy out to the yard to play while she and Daniel sat across from me at the kitchen table. "We don't want this to get ugly," she began, echoing Bill's warning with a sugar-coated smile. "But if you force our hand, the courts will drag it into the open. Is that what you want, Martha? To be remembered as the woman who couldn't let go?" My gaze flicked to Daniel. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Your father and I worked this land with our hands until they bled," I said quietly. "I won't hand it over because you think I'm too old." Cynthia leaned forward, her voice low. "It's not just about age, it's about legacy. And if you're not careful, you'll ruin Daniel's chance to carry his father's name forward." Her words struck harder than she knew. If only she had seen the letter hidden upstairs. The truth Frank had confessed with trembling pen. Daniel may not be mine by blood. A secret that made her threats all the more hollow and all the more dangerous if she ever discovered it. When they left, Leo waved at me from the yard. His small hand lifted in innocence, a reminder of what was truly at stake. I waved back, my heart aching. This wasn't just a battle over land. It was a battle over what kind of story Leo would grow up believing about his family. That night, I sat at Frank's desk and opened the secret letter again. I traced his handwriting with my finger, feeling the weight of his honesty. He had trusted me to protect Daniel, even from truths that could break him. But how long could I keep it buried? The question gnawed at me like a slow fire. The court summons came the following Tuesday, a hearing in 3 weeks. My breath caught as I read the date. 3 weeks to gather my strength, my evidence, my resolve. 3 weeks to stand not only for myself, but for Frank's trust in me. I folded the summons and tucked it into Frank's old Bible on the nightstand. Then I whispered into the empty room, "I'll fight, Frank. I'll fight the way you taught me." But even as the words left my lips, I felt the trembling in my hands, because fighting meant risking secrets, and secrets, once exposed, have a way of cutting deeper than any court ever could. The weeks before the hearing moved like waterlogged days, heavy and slow, yet gone before I could catch my breath. I spent hours in the fields, my boots sinking into thawing ground, trying to draw strength from the land itself. Every furrow whispered Frank's name. Every fence post carried the weight of his hands. I told myself if I could just hold on to that rhythm, I would be ready when the day came. But the quiet of the farm could not drown out the drumbeat of fear. Neighbors began stopping by more often, some with kindness, others with curiosity sharpened into judgment. Mrs. Whitman brought a pie and tried not to pry, though her eyes flickered to the stack of papers on the table. Mr. Collins came by with seed catalogs and slipped in a question about whether I was still planning to plant this season. They were watching, all of them, waiting to see whether Martha Ellis would stand or crumble. Cynthia had made sure the whole town knew what was at stake. One afternoon, I drove into the county seat to meet with Bill Harper again. His office smelled of old wood and ink, a comforting blend. He had spread my documents across his desk like pieces of a puzzle. "The trust is solid," he said, tapping the thick folder. "Cynthia can argue all she wants, but legally she doesn't have a leg to stand on. What she does have is noise. She'll try to embarrass you, drag out every weakness, make you look frail. Be ready for that." "I don't mind looking old," I told him. "I mind looking weak." Bill leaned forward, his voice softer. "You're not weak, Martha, but you'll need to be steady. Don't let her bait you." His words stayed with me as I drove home, past fields still bare, past the church steeple glinting in the afternoon light. Steady. That was the word Frank had always used. "Hold steady, Martha. You'll know what to do." At night, I practiced in front of the mirror. I rehearsed simple sentences. The farm was left in my trust. Frank wanted me to continue it. I am capable. I am responsible. I must have looked foolish, whispering lines to my own reflection, but I needed to hear the words aloud, to feel them solid in my chest. Daniel visited only once in those weeks. He came alone without Cynthia, his face weary. He sat at the kitchen table staring at his coffee. "I don't know how to stop her," he admitted. "She says this is about protecting Leo's future. She says I'm letting my father's name fade if I don't fight for the farm." I wanted to tell him the truth then, to thrust Frank's letter into his hands and show him how little bloodlines had mattered to his father. But the words stuck in my throat. How could I wound him like that when he was already drowning in doubt? Instead, I reached across the table and held his hand. "Your father loved you. He didn't need papers to prove it. Don't forget that." He squeezed my hand but said nothing more. When he left, the silence he carried lingered long after his truck disappeared down the road. The night before the hearing, I could not sleep. I sat in Frank's chair by the fire, the secret letter tucked into my apron pocket. I read it again, even though I knew every word by heart. "Daniel may not be mine by blood." The sentence glared at me, but beneath it lay the truth Frank had etched into my bones. Love raises a child. I held on to that as the fire dwindled to embers. The morning of the hearing dawned gray and cold. I dressed in my best dress, the one I had worn to church on Easter mornings, and pinned my hair back with Frank's mother's comb. Bill picked me up in his old sedan, his presence steadying me more than I expected. The courthouse was already buzzing when we arrived. Reporters from the local paper lingered outside, neighbors clustered in small knots, their whispers rising like a hive. Inside, the wooden benches creaked under the weight of curious bodies. Cynthia and Daniel were already seated, their attorney polished and sharp. Cynthia turned as I entered, her smile brittle and victorious. I took my seat beside Bill, my hands folded tightly in my lap. The judge, a man with tired eyes and a gavel that looked older than the courthouse itself, called the room to order. "We are here to hear the matter of the Ellis farm and estate," he announced. "The petitioner, Cynthia Hart, on behalf of her husband Daniel Hart, has filed to assume control of the farm. The respondent, Martha Ellis, disputes this claim." My heart pounded, but I kept my gaze steady. Cynthia's lawyer spoke first, his words smooth as glass. He painted me as a widow overwhelmed, a woman clinging to a legacy she could no longer sustain. He spoke of debts, of labor I could not manage, of a grandson's future at risk. Cynthia nodded along, her face the picture of concern. When he finished, Bill rose. His voice was calm but firm. "Your Honor, the farm is not in question. It was placed in a legal trust by the late Frank Ellis, with Martha Ellis as the sole trustee. The documents are clear, binding, and enforceable. This case is not about capacity. It is about honoring the wishes of the deceased." He laid the papers on the judge's bench, the rustle of pages louder than the whispers in the gallery. The judge glanced through them, his brow furrowed. "These appear thorough. We will review them in detail." He turned his gaze to me. "Mrs. Ellis, do you have anything you wish to say?" I rose, my knees trembling but my back straight. "Your Honor," I began, my voice catching before it steadied. "This farm is my life. My husband and I built it together. He trusted me to carry it on. I am not here to cling. I am here to honor him." The room fell quiet. Even Cynthia's smirk faltered. The judge nodded once. "We will recess for review. Return tomorrow for further arguments." As the gavel struck, the air seemed to release in a rush. I sat down, my breath shallow, my hands shaking. Bill leaned close. "You did fine, Martha. Steady." But as I gathered my papers, I caught Cynthia's eyes across the room. They burned with something sharp, something dangerous. She wasn't finished. I hardly slept that night, lying awake with the echoes of the courtroom still rattling in my head. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Cynthia's face, that cold glimmer in her eyes when she realized the trust papers were real. She would not back down. I knew her type. She would dig deeper, twist sharper, try every angle until something bent. At dawn, I rose and walked the fields, letting the frosted ground steady me. The air bit my lungs, but it cleared my thoughts. Frank's words drifted through me like the wind. "Hold steady." I clung to them as if they were the only anchor left. When I returned to the farmhouse, a letter was waiting in the mailbox. No return address, only my name scrawled across the front. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper with typed words. "She has proof. Don't let her use it." My stomach twisted. Proof of what? I folded the letter quickly and tucked it into my pocket. If Cynthia had discovered something, I needed to know what it was before she wielded it like a blade. The only secret worth hiding was the one in Frank's private letter about Daniel. Could she have found a way to sense it? The thought made my knees weak. At the courthouse that afternoon, the benches were even more crowded. Word had spread, and now the whole county seemed to be pressing in to watch. The judge entered, and the murmurs died down. Cynthia's lawyer rose first, his voice smooth as ever. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge the existence of the trust, we question its validity. Was Mr. Ellis of sound mind when he signed? Was he influenced unfairly? Did Mrs. Ellis, as trustee, conceal material facts?" The words landed heavy. Influence. Conceal. My hands tightened in my lap. Bill rose to counter. "Your Honor, Mr. Ellis was in full command of his faculties. The documents were notarized, reviewed by independent counsel. The insinuations made here are unfounded and offensive." The judge's gaze shifted to me. "Mrs. Ellis, do you have anything to add?" I stood, my heart pounding. My husband was clear. He wanted the farm in my care. There was no trickery, only trust. Before I could sit, Cynthia stood abruptly. "He was hiding something," she blurted. Gasps rippled through the room. She reached into her bag and produced an old photograph, holding it up with shaking fingers. It showed Frank in his younger years, standing beside a woman I didn't recognize. "Who is she?" Cynthia demanded, her eyes drilling into me. "What did he keep from us?" My breath caught. I had never seen that photograph, but I knew at once it was Margaret, a woman Frank had once worked with before I met him. His name and hers had been buried in old records I'd seen in the bank box. She had nothing to do with the farm now, but Cynthia had found the picture and spun her own story. I steadied my voice. That was long before my time. Frank was faithful to me, to this farm. You know nothing about this picture. But Cynthia's voice rose. If he lied about her, what else did he lie about? How do we know he was in his right mind when he left everything to you? The judge rapped his gavel. Order. Mrs. Hart, this is not the time for personal speculation. But the damage was done. Whispers buzzed through the gallery, sharp and stinging. We recessed again, and I walked out under the weight of 100 eyes. Outside the courthouse, Cynthia's words followed me like smoke. She was playing with shadows, but shadows were powerful in small towns. Back home, I went straight to Frank's desk. I pulled out the private letter again, the one that whispered the truth about Daniel. I read it until the words blurred. Daniel may not be mine by blood. I pressed my forehead against the paper. If Cynthia ever got her hands on this, she could twist it worse than any photograph. That evening, Daniel arrived, his face pale. Mom, he said, closing the door behind him. Cynthia's talking wild. She says Dad had secrets. She says maybe the trust isn't valid. I don't know what to believe anymore. I reached for his hand, my heart breaking. Believe this. Your father loved you. That was the truest thing about him. Don't let her make you doubt it. He looked at me, his eyes wet. Then why did he leave you everything and not me? The question sliced me open. I wanted to tell him about the trust, about the letter, about how Frank had wanted to shield him from Cynthia's grip, but the words tangled in my throat. Because he trusted me to keep it safe. That's all you need to know. Daniel pulled his hand back. Cynthia says I'm being blind. Maybe I am, but maybe you're not telling me everything either. He left before I could answer, the sound of the door closing echoing through the farmhouse like a shot. I sank into Frank's chair, the private letter still clutched in my hand. The secrets were pressing closer now, tighter with every breath. Cynthia was stirring shadows, Daniel was losing faith, and the truth I carried threatened to shatter us all. The hearing was far from over, but I already felt the storm breaking overhead. The night before the next session, the wind howled across the farm like a restless spirit. I walked from room to room, checking windows, touching the frames of photographs that seemed to stare back with questions I couldn't answer. Frank's letter lay folded in my apron pocket, burning against me like a coal. I wanted to hide it deep in a drawer, but I couldn't bring myself to let it go. It was as if keeping it close gave me the courage to keep standing. At dawn, I dressed carefully, fastening Frank's mother's comb in my hair once again. Bill drove us to the courthouse in silence, his hands tight on the wheel. When we arrived, the benches were full. The whole town seemed to be there, their eyes hungry for answers. The judge entered, and the murmur of voices fell away. He called for order, then invited Cynthia's lawyer to continue his argument. The man stood with practiced ease, his voice rolling like polished stone. Your Honor, we have reason to believe Mr. Ellis was influenced unduly in his final years. We submit that his trust was not a clear expression of his intent, but the product of manipulation. We request the court to void the trust and return the farm to its rightful heir, Daniel Hart. The word manipulation lodged in my chest like a thorn. Bill rose swiftly, his voice firm. There is no evidence of manipulation. The trust was established years before Mr. Ellis's health declined. Independent counsel reviewed it, notarized, documented, thorough. The judge's eyes moved between them. Does the respondent wish to speak? Bill gave me a small nod. I rose slowly, my knees trembling, but my voice clear. My husband was a man of quiet conviction. He made this trust because he foresaw conflict. He wanted the farm to be protected from outside influence. He wanted it to remain in the hands of someone who had worked it beside him. From the corner of my eye, I saw Cynthia smirk, as if she'd been waiting for that line. She stood suddenly, without permission. Outside influence? You mean me, don't you, Martha? You think I'm the problem here. But maybe the problem is that Frank couldn't trust you either. Maybe that's why he kept secrets." Her voice rang sharp across the room. Gasps rippled through the benches. Daniel shifted uncomfortably beside her, his face caught between loyalty and confusion. The judge's gavel struck once. "Mrs. Hart, you will sit. This is not your turn." But the words were already loose in the air. Secrets, trust, doubt. They swirled through the crowd like dust in sunlight, impossible to catch once scattered. We recessed for lunch, and I stepped outside into the cold air. A cluster of neighbors eyed me with pity and suspicion, whispers trailing behind them. I pulled my shawl tighter and walked to the far corner of the square, needing distance from their stares. Bill joined me after a moment, his jaw tight. "She's baiting you," he said. "Don't rise to it. Stick to the documents. They are your anchor." I nodded, but inside my chest, Frank's private letter seemed to scream louder than any lawyer. Secrets. What if Cynthia wasn't just stirring shadows? What if somehow she already suspected the truth about Daniel? When we reconvened, the judge called for further evidence. Bill presented the financial records, the notarized statements, the savings account documents. The judge examined each carefully, nodding occasionally. "These are in order," he said at last. Relief flickered in me, but it was short-lived. Cynthia's lawyer stood again. "Your Honor, regardless of documents, the court must also consider intent. Did Mr. Ellis truly wish to cut his son out of ownership? Did he mean to leave his widow with such a burden, or was he cornered by fear and secrecy?" The judge's gaze shifted to me once more. "Mrs. Ellis, you may respond." I rose again, my breath steady. "My husband left me this farm not to burden me, but because he knew I would protect it. He knew I would honor what we built. He never turned from Daniel. He simply trusted me to carry it forward." Cynthia's voice sliced through the room. "Trusted you more than his own blood?" The gavel cracked down. "Mrs. Hart, one more interruption and you will be removed." The silence that followed was taut as wire. I lowered myself into my seat, my hands shaking. I wanted to cry out that blood was not the measure of love, that Frank had seen deeper than lineage, but the words locked in my throat. To say them aloud would be to invite the very secret I carried to burst into the open. The judge adjourned early, announcing he would deliberate further before calling final arguments. As the gavel struck, relief and dread tangled in me. I had survived another day, but the storm had only thickened. Outside the courthouse, Cynthia approached me, her eyes narrow. "You think you've won just because you wave a few papers around? You don't know half of what I know." She leaned close, her breath hot against my ear. "Secrets have a way of spilling, Martha. Don't forget that." She swept away, leaving me frozen on the steps. I clutched the railing, my knuckles white, and whispered under my breath, "Hold steady." But even as I said it, I felt the tremor in my bones. That night, I sat at Frank's desk, the oil lamp throwing shadows across the walls. The farmhouse creaked in the wind, but the louder noise was inside me. Cynthia's words wouldn't leave my ears. Secrets have a way of spilling. I pulled the private letter from my apron pocket and read it again, though I knew every curve of Frank's handwriting by heart. Daniel may not be mine by blood. The weight of it pressed against me harder than any gavel ever could. I thought of Daniel's face in court, pale with doubt, and the way he'd asked me why his father hadn't left him the farm. I wanted to protect him, to shield him from pain. But if Cynthia uncovered this truth, she would use it to shatter him. The thought made me feel sick. The next morning, Bill came by to check on me. He studied my face, his brow furrowed. "You look worn thin, Martha. What's she holding over you?" I nearly told him. The words perched on my tongue, begging for release, but fear pinned them down. If I spoke, it would become real beyond my own kitchen. Instead, I shook my head. "Just her games. She likes to rattle cages." He didn't look convinced, but he let it go. Before leaving, he placed a hand on my shoulder. "Steady, remember? She thrives on weakness. Don't give it to her." That afternoon, I found Daniel waiting by the barn. His truck was parked crookedly, as if he'd been too restless to line it up. He looked tired, older than his years. "Mom," he began, his voice low. "She's pushing too hard. I don't know if I can keep this up." Relief surged through me. "Then tell her to stop, Daniel. Tell her to let it go." But he shook his head. "It's not that simple. She keeps saying there's more to this, that Dad had secrets. Did he?" The question pierced me like a nail. I wanted to lie, to soothe him, but the truth swelled inside me like a tide. My mouth opened, but before I could answer, Leo came running around the corner, laughing with a stick in his hand. Daniel's face softened, and the moment slipped away. "Forget it," he muttered. "I'll handle her." He scooped up his boy and drove off before I could speak. That night, I dreamed of Frank. He stood in the fields, the wind tugging at his hat, his face both familiar and far. He held out his hand, but when I reached for it, he placed the folded letter in my palm instead. I woke with tears on my cheeks and the dawn already pushing against the curtains. 2 days later, we gathered in court again. The gallery was so full, people stood along the walls. The judge called for closing arguments. Cynthia's lawyer rose, his words practiced and sharp. He spoke of lineage, of tradition, of a son's right to his father's legacy. He painted me as stubborn, unwilling to pass the torch, blinded by grief. Cynthia dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, though I saw the glint behind the act. When he finished, Bill stood. His voice was steady, measured. "Your Honor, this case is not about stubbornness. It is about honoring a man's clear intent. Frank Ellis placed his farm and savings in trust for his wife, Martha Ellis. The documents are lawful, binding, and irrefutable. To strip her of this would be to strip Mr. Ellis of his voice." He placed the trust documents on the bench once more, his hand firm atop them. The judge turned to me. "Mrs. Ellis, you may speak if you wish." I rose slowly, my knees stiff, my hands clenched. The room swayed with the weight of eyes. "Your Honor," I began, "I am not here to win. I am here to keep faith. My husband trusted me with this land because he knew I had given my life to it. He knew I would protect it, not for myself alone, but for the family and the future it was meant to serve." My throat tightened, but I forced myself to go on. "This farm is not just dirt and fences. It is memory, labor, love. I cannot surrender it simply because someone thinks I am too old. My husband's trust was not a mistake. It was his last act of care." The silence afterward was heavy as stone. Even the judge seemed moved, his eyes softer than before. Then Cynthia rose abruptly. "She's hiding something," she declared, her voice trembling with fury. "Frank didn't trust her. He kept secrets from her, from all of us. Ask her about the letter." My heart froze. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Daniel looked at me sharply, confusion in his eyes. "What letter?" he asked, his voice breaking. The judge's gavel cracked. "Enough, Mrs. Hart, sit down." But the question hung in the air, hot and unrelenting. Daniel's gaze burned into me. I clutched the edge of the table, my secret pulsing like a live wire in my pocket. The judge announced he would review all evidence and deliver a ruling within the week. As the gavel fell, the crowd surged with whispers. I lowered myself into my chair, my breath ragged. Cynthia's smile flickered at me from across the room, sharp and satisfied. She didn't have the letter, but she had planted the doubt. Outside, Daniel cornered me before I reached Bill's car. "Mom," he said, his voice low and desperate, "what letter is she talking about?" I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. All I could do was shake my head and whisper, "Not now." He pulled back as if struck, his eyes clouded with betrayal. Then he walked away, leaving me standing alone on the courthouse steps, clutching the secret that threatened to break us both. The house felt colder after that day in court, as though Cynthia had managed to slip her frost through the very walls. I kept the fire burning long into the night, but the chill wasn't in the air. It was inside me. Daniel's face haunted me. The disbelief in his eyes when he asked about the letter, the way he stepped back as if I had already betrayed him by refusing to answer. I sat in Frank's chair with the folded paper heavy in my apron pocket and wondered how much longer I could hold it in. 3 days later, the phone rang. It was Daniel. His voice was strained. "Mom, she won't let it go. She keeps talking about secrets, about how you're hiding something that could change everything. I don't know what to believe anymore. Please, just tell me." My throat closed. "Daniel, what matters is that your father loved you. He trusted me with the farm because he wanted it safe. That's the truth that counts." He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was hollow. "Sometimes, love doesn't feel like enough." Then the line went dead. I sat there with the receiver pressed to my ear long after the dial tone began. The farmhouse was too quiet, the shadows too long. I wanted to run after him, to shout the truth, to beg him not to let Cynthia poison him against me. But how could I tell him without tearing away the ground beneath his feet? Daniel may not be mine by blood. The words burned like fire. That evening I walked out to the barn. The boards groaned under my boots, the smell of hay and dust thick in the air. Frank's old tools still hung neatly, his handprints left in the worn handles. I touched them one by one, as if his steadiness might transfer through the wood. "What am I supposed to do, Frank?" I whispered. The only answer was the rattle of wind through the rafters. The hearing was set for the following morning. Bill drove me again, his jaw clenched. As we pulled into town, we saw a crowd gathered on the courthouse steps. More reporters now, their cameras clicking. Cynthia was already there, her arm looped through Daniel's, her face bright with confidence. Daniel didn't look at me as I walked past. Inside, the judge called us to order. "I have reviewed the documents and arguments. Today we will hear final statements before I issue a ruling." Cynthia's lawyer stood, his voice booming. "Your Honor, this case is about more than papers. It is about truth. Was Frank Ellis misled in his final years? Did Martha Ellis conceal facts that, if known, would change everything? We believe she did. And until those questions are answered, this trust cannot be honored." The judge turned to Bill. "Response?" Bill rose. "Your Honor, the documents are binding. The counsel was independent. The trust is valid. Rumors are not evidence. We urge the court to reject this baseless challenge." The judge's gaze moved to me. "Mrs. Ellis, do you wish to speak one last time?" I stood slowly, every eye in the room fixed on me. My hands trembled, but my voice was steady. This farm was my life with Frank. He trusted me because he knew I had given everything to it. There are no tricks, no lies, only the truth of our labor and our love. A murmur swept the benches. For a moment I thought I had steadied the room. But then Cynthia rose, her voice sharp. "She lies. There is a letter. Frank left it. She's hiding it even now." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Daniel turned to me, his face stricken. "Mom," he whispered, "is it true?" The judge's gavel cracked. "Enough! Mrs. Hart, you are out of order." But Daniel's eyes didn't leave mine. They searched, pleading, breaking. I felt the letter burning in my pocket, its weight unbearable. For weeks I had carried it like a shield, but now it felt like a blade against my own heart. I wanted to shout no, to deny it, to protect him, but the truth pressed harder. I sank back into my chair, my silence louder than any words. Daniel's shoulders sagged, and something in his gaze dimmed. The judge cleared his throat. "This court will deliver its ruling in writing within the week." His gavel struck once more, ending it. The crowd surged with whispers as we left. Cynthia's smile was triumphant, but it was Daniel's broken look that followed me home, heavier than any verdict. That night, I lit the lamp and unfolded Frank's letter one more time. The words blurred through my tears. He had trusted me not just to protect the farm, but to protect Daniel from a truth that could unravel him. Yet by staying silent, I had already begun to lose him. I pressed the paper flat against the desk. The storm was nearly over, one way or another. Soon the judge would rule. But the real decision, the one Frank had left in my hands, still waited. The morning the ruling arrived, the air was heavy with rain. A courier handed me the envelope at the door, his cap dripping, his eyes averted as if he knew the weight of what he carried. I held the paper against my chest, my heart hammering. For days I had dreaded this moment, but now that it was here, I almost couldn't bring myself to tear it open. I carried it to Frank's old chair, sat down, and broke the seal with trembling fingers. The judge's words were steady, legal, and unyielding. The trust established by Frank Ellis is valid and binding. The farm, residents, and associated accounts are to remain in the care of Martha Ellis as trustee. All challenges are dismissed. Relief flooded me, sharp and dizzying. I pressed my hand to my mouth, tears slipping free. The farm was safe. Frank's trust had held. Cynthia had lost. But even as I wept, I knew the greater battle was still before me. That evening, Daniel appeared at the farmhouse. He didn't knock. He walked in as he always had, but his face was pale, his shoulders slumped. "It's over," he said quietly. "She's furious, but it's done. The judge gave it to you." I nodded. "It wasn't about winning, Daniel. It was about honoring your father." His eyes searched mine. "Then why does it feel like I lost?" The words cut deep. He sank into a chair. His hands clasped tightly. "Mom, tell me the truth. Was there a letter? Did Dad leave something you haven't shown me?" The farmhouse was silent except for the rain pattering against the windows. I walked to Frank's desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out the folded envelope I had guarded like a relic. I placed it on the table between us. Yes, there was a letter. Daniel stared at it, his throat working. "Can I read it?" I shook my head gently. "Not yet. Let me read it to you." My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. The words blurred, but I forced them out. I told him everything. Frank's confession, his uncertainty about blood, his insistence that love raises a child. I read every word until the silence grew so heavy I thought it might crush us both. When I finished, Daniel sat motionless. His face was ashen, his eyes hollow. "So all these years," he whispered, "I might not have been his son." I reached for his hand, tears streaming. "You were his son, Daniel? Every day, every season." He never doubted that in his heart. Blood didn't matter to him. You mattered. You always did. He pulled his hand away, his breath ragged. "And you kept this from me. You let me stand in court, let her tear at me, while you held this letter in your pocket." "I was trying to protect you," I whispered. "Protect me?" His voice cracked. "You've broken me." He stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He paced the kitchen, his hands raking through his hair. All those years, I thought he was disappointed in me. Maybe he was just reminded every time he looked at me that I wasn't his. "Daniel, no," I cried, rising to my feet. "He loved you. He built this trust not to take from you, but to shield you from Cynthia. He wanted you safe." Daniel stopped, his shoulders slumping. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Then why do I feel like I don't belong anywhere?" I stepped closer, my hand resting on his arm. "Because Cynthia filled your head with poison. Don't let her steal the truth Frank left you. You were his son in every way that mattered. You are my son. Nothing can change that." He closed his eyes, tears slipping down his cheeks. For a long moment he said nothing. Then slowly he sank back into the chair, his head bowed. "I don't know how to live with this, Mom." "We'll live with it together," I said. The truth hurts, but it doesn't erase love. We'll carry it the way we've carried everything else, through storms, through loss, through the weight of the farm. Silence stretched between us, but it was softer now. The rain eased outside and the farmhouse seemed to exhale. Weeks passed, and Cynthia's presence faded. She packed her things and left town with Leo, her pride wounded, her schemes collapsed. The gossip lingered for a time, but even that dulled as the seasons turned. The farm, though scarred by the fight, stood steady. Daniel returned slowly, first to fix a fence, then to mend a gate, then to walk the fields with me in the fading light. He never spoke of the letter again, but I saw its shadow in his eyes. Still, he came. And each time he did, I felt Frank's voice echo through the soil. Hold steady. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the horizon, Daniel turned to me. Maybe Leo should know the farm as I knew it. Maybe he should run through these fields. My throat tightened. That's what your father would have wanted. Daniel nodded, his face weary but softer. I still don't know who I am sometimes, but maybe I can find out here. I touched his shoulder, my heart aching with both sorrow and hope. This farm has carried all our truths, Daniel. It can carry yours, too. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought of Frank. His secrets had shaken us, but his love had anchored us. The farm was more than soil and fences. It was memory, struggle, forgiveness. It was family, broken, mended, chosen. And as I drifted into sleep, I whispered into the quiet, "We're holding steady, Frank, just like you asked." Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it touched your heart, please subscribe to Tears Within and share in the comments where you're listening from. I'd love to know.